Well, Bob, checking out the Boston area traffic is not a very good ride right now. Downtown checking.
Tobin, Lower Deck, and the Sumner Tunnel are all jammed, and an accident scene being reported now.
Scarborough Drive inbound is back to the Longfellow Bridge. Outbound express heavy to Andrews Square.
Also, roads like Rutherford Avenue for the deck, that's full as well. Back to
the Tobin, Lower Deck, and Sumner jammed to their usual spots. It's 52 degrees. I'm Lainey Fisher, and this is...
I've been trying to get to you for a long time, because constantly you've been on my mind. I was thinking about a shortcut I could take, but it seems like I made a mistake.
Hello, I'm Arnie Reisman. I first saw pictures of Boston traffic in a rare illustrated edition of Dante's Inferno. Maybe not. Memory plays tricks on you when you're going nowhere. Boston traffic is a mess. Just ask anyone who has to use the Central Artery, the Southeast Expressway, the John Fitzgerald Expressway, or... Wait a minute. Let's back up here. Aren't they just different names for the same road? This is the only metropolitan area I can think of where they take one road and change its name every half mile or so. But then again, this is the same place that has an airport tunnel system called Callahan in one direction and Sumner in the other. Just as I said, it's a mess. Just ask anyone who has to use this roadway, whatever you call it.
Sucks. Takes me about an hour from here to Dorchester.
I think that kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? I've been from Revere, it's taken me almost half an hour.
You really don't want to know.
Sometimes it makes no difference what road you take, whether you're going into Boston or out of it, whether you're on your way to the airport or Fenway Park. Some days it looks like you've driven right into a picture postcard.
I'm from out of town and I'm lost, so I'm doing the best I can with it. I got to get to the turnpike, that's all.
At the heart of the problem is what most of us call the Central Artery. Opened in 1954, this short stretch of interstate was designed to be a graceful, elevated city street between North and South stations. The architects planned on a traffic capacity of 75,000 cars. 40 years later, this roadway has become a conveyor belt for nearly 200,000 vehicles a day. During the next decade, this weary artery will be torn down and replaced with an underground thruway. A third harbor tunnel will also be built. It's called the Big Dig. And once it's completed, driving through Boston will never be the same.
On the expressway to your heart, that expressway, not the best way. At 5 o'clock, it's much too crowded. No, it's much too crowded. So crowded. It's much too crowded.
The worst traffic jam I was ever in actually wasn't going to work. I was going to the airport on a Sunday evening to catch a 6 o'clock plane, not realizing that Sunday was the big night that everybody goes to the airport. We're bringing friends in, and we put in some bread in the oven before we left, figuring it wouldn't take us more than an hour. Well, we didn't even get to the airport in an hour. Normally it takes 10, 15 minutes for me to get to the airport. It took over probably an hour and 15 minutes. We stopped along the side of the road and called our neighbor to turn off the oven so the bread wouldn't burn. And it must have taken us in total over 2.5 hours to get to the airport and back.
Kathy and Tim are North Shore commuters. Each day they make the trek to their jobs in Boston. Like thousands of others who follow this route, they have heard about the Big Dig and wonder just how it will affect them.
Now, this Third Harbor Tunnel, is there going to be a third? It's an additional way to get into Boston? Is that what it's going to be? Or are they going
I think so.
Are they just, the Tobin Bridge is going to go into it? I wonder how it's going to work.
No, I think there's actually going to be another tunnel.
Where's the new tunnel going to be?
I don't know, somewhere out there. I don't know exactly.
Do you know what you're talking about?
Here's a project that's going to affect everyone in and around Boston. But do most of us have even a clue as to what's going on here?
The Big Dig is the nation's largest public works project. 7 miles of construction will span Charlestown in the north to the Mass Avenue interchange in the south and will include East Boston, the North End, downtown, and South Boston. The new design aims for improved traffic flow through a depressed 8-lane central artery and a seaport access route stretching from the Mass Pike under Fort Point Channel across the South Boston Flats through a third harbor tunnel to Logan Airport and Route 1A. By the time it's actually finished, this whole redevelopment of Boston traffic will cost in excess of $7 billion. That's about $1 billion a mile. And nearly 90% of that is federal funding, a veritable hot-ticket item. That Massachusetts receives such a handsome benefit is in part due to the high seniority of our congressional delegation and state lobbying efforts. Alan Altshuler was the state's first Secretary of Transportation. He has been a keen observer of the wheelings and dealings of this project since his days in Governor Frank Sargent's administration 20 years ago.
My sense of this project is that it's a marvelous thing for Boston and for Massachusetts. It will be aesthetically attractive. It will greatly improve the appeal of downtown Boston. It will greatly improve travel opportunities in Boston. It will create vast numbers of jobs in a decade when the region and the state, God knows, need them badly. It will attract large sums of money from the rest of the country into Massachusetts. One can view the Central Artery Third Harbor Crossing project as a kind of export industry for Massachusetts because we exported lobbyists and we are importing lots of money from the rest of the country to build these projects. Obviously, if one were a taxpayer in Montana, you might have a somewhat less benign view of this project, but of course they've gotten theirs over the years as well. This is one of the greatest goodies that anybody has ever managed to pull into their state.
Especially when you consider the condition of the old artery. Officially listed on maps as part of the John Fitzgerald Expressway, it's a beaten path of rusting metal and worn asphalt. Originally designed as a small link in a planned loop around Boston and Cambridge, the Central Artery has had to survive on its own. But it's done it with distinction. For example, there's the heart-pounding excitement of the merge at the Charles River crossing, considered the most dangerous stretch of interstate highway in the country. And what other interstate not only offers police patrol traffic, but requires it? No matter the time of day, odds are when you reach the Central Artery, your foot will spend quality time with your brake. Some call it the Green Monster. But 40 years ago, it was known romantically as the Sky Road.
Massachusetts can keep in step with today to keep our cars and trucks rolling on the highways.
Construction on the Central Artery ran from 1951 through 1954. Then, too, it was the country's biggest public works project. There were innovations in its design, including on and off ramps that could melt snow. And the Dewey Square Tunnel under South Station was considered the first of its kind. Chan Rogers was fresh out of MIT when he joined the project as an engineer in 1950.
It was considered well ahead of itself in terms of innovation. As a matter of fact, there were no criteria to go by. We were really literally flying by the seat of our pants in terms of design concepts, location of ramps, and various elements of the traffic engineering had no precedent any place in the country. And so it was simply one person's idea and concept against another person's belief.
After one person's vision actually triumphed over another's, construction of the Central Artery, or what was then called the Inner Belt, began in Charlestown and continued south through downtown Boston. Progress was smooth until the hard hats reached Dewey Square at South Station. There, all work came to an abrupt stop.
This point, which used to be called Fort Hill Square, it's now One International Place, is where the design was went into a hiatus of almost 2 years in 1952 to 1954, while the city and the state had a discussion about the location of the artery south of this point. The city wanted it along Atlantic Avenue and right beside South Station. The state wanted it where its current location is through the Leather District.
New York consultants were brought in to settle the dispute. They agreed with the state about the artery's route, but shocked planners with the recommendation that the Sky Road become a tunnel under South Station.
While at first that was looked askance because of the cost. Instead of about $5 million, it would cost about $15 million to put it underground. But then Commissioner Volpe made that decision, and it was a great decision because now that idea is emulated by putting the entire Central Artery underground, which proves the validity of having made that decision back in 1954. And the tunnel was finished and open for traffic in 1959, a period of 5 years. And there was no counterpart to putting it underground. It was a great innovation. There was no precedent for it of putting a limited access highway underground.
Within a decade after finishing the old artery, talk began about taking the whole thing and putting it underground. Talk also began about building a third harbor tunnel to ease airport and North Shore traffic. These opinions were not coming from the same sector. While the business community pushed for the harbor tunnel, environmentalists and developers called for depression of the artery. It took a lot of talking to bring everyone together in one big dig.
The interesting thing about this project is that it is an amalgamation of two projects, the tunnel and the artery. And the advocates of the tunnel and the artery were at each other's throats throughout the 1970s. One governor would favor one, next governor would come in and throw that one out and favor the next, particularly true of King and Dukakis in that respect. I think the two critical points in the history of this project, politically, are first, in 1983, when Dukakis came back, the decision, which was championed by Fred Salvucci, who became Dukakis' Secretary of Transportation, to bring these two projects together into one grand mega project and try to unify the advocates of both projects. And second was the transition to the Weld administration, which was the first time that this project ever moved from one administration to another without a radical change of course. And that reflected, I think, in part, the strength of the grand coalition that had gradually accumulated around this project, and the fact that it had really gone beyond partisan politics.
So now it's full speed ahead. We are traveling 40 miles an hour through a computer-assisted design of what the new artery might look like by 1998, when it will be depressed under the surface road between North and South stations. It will have 4 lanes going in each direction. There will be 7 on-ramps and 7 off-ramps connecting the underground artery to the Boston Garden, Haymarket, Faneuil Hall, the North End, the Financial District, the Harbor Waterfront, and South Station. And it will also link up with the Sumner and Callahan tunnels.
Here's a question we've all been dying to ask. I'm over at the surface road, which separates downtown Boston from the waterfront. If they're going to be tunneling under here and dismantling up there, how are we ever going to get to the Callahan Tunnel over there?
To help us understand how we're supposed to survive this construction, let's take a shortcut through illustrations of the process provided by artist David McCauley. First, they're going to build support walls about 80 to 90 feet deep into bedrock. The brown part here represents a cross-section of the earth. These walls, shown in yellow, will not only confine the digging below the surface road, but also hold up the elevated artery. To ensure this, beams will be erected under the artery's stanchions. Once all the supports are in place, excavation can start for the northbound tunnel. During this phase, we'll all have our work cut out for us. The surface road will be covered with decking planks, and traffic will be gerrymandered by cement barriers. While motorists navigate this labyrinth, pedestrians will be able to travel through enclosed walkways to avoid flying debris or gaping holes. Once the northbound tunnel is ready for traffic, then construction will begin on the southbound tunnel. And once all vehicles can travel underground, they'll dismantle the old Sky Road. When it's all finished, there will be a new surface road, and the Green Monster will have given way to Green Acres. This is what it might look like by the year 2001, traveling north above ground from Rose Wharf. The new surface road will have 3 north lanes and 3 south lanes, bordering proposed parklands and several new buildings. 27 acres of urban beauty. If all goes well, all this construction will be extremely well choreographed. If all doesn't go well, we'll have to figure out a 5-year plan for staying out of Boston. On the drawing board, everything looks fine. In reality, there's usually a large smudge or two. Take the Charles River crossing. It will not really begin on the new central artery until a new design is approved for the crossing, which connects routes 1 and 93 at the northern point of the project with Starl Drive and the central artery. Since the controversial Scheme Z promoted by the Dukakis administration was rejected after much political feuding and a Sierra Club lawsuit, there have been 3 other attempts to come up with a suitable crossing design. Federal regulations prohibit actual construction of a federally funded project until every element within the project is approved. It's a delicate balancing act, according to Transportation Secretary James Karasiotis.
Clearly, if we go with one scheme, we're going to end up with people on one side of the river that may not be able to deal with it, and if we go with another scheme, we're going to have people on the other side of the river that may not be able to deal with it. So what we've got to do, and what we've worked very hard at over the past year, is to build a consensus around an alternative that's buildable, an alternative that's financeable.
At the time of this taping, the state had submitted a new Charles River crossing design for consideration to anyone who wanted to see it. The long review process was set in motion. To reach approval, first must come public hearings and a new environmental impact study. The latest plan includes a 10-lane, single-deck bridge, 3 tunnels under the river and North Station, and parkland for pedestrians and bicyclists on both riverbanks. Unfortunately, it also includes the relocation of the Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital, because it's in the way of the tunneling. To achieve this move, another $200 million has been factored in. The cash register keeps on ringing. While we wait for approval or another rejection, the digging continues on the north side of the Charles. This is the Central Artery North Area Project, commonly referred to as CANA, and supported by funds from a separate federal grant. A 2-way tunnel system being constructed under City Square in Charlestown, it will eventually connect to whatever becomes the Charles River crossing. The CANA interchange is slated to be open to local traffic in the first half of 1993. About a year later, there will be a ceremonial ribbon cutting for the opening of the long-discussed Third Harbor Tunnel. Funding here is also not directly tied to the artery. In addition to the existing routes to Logan, a new Seaport access road will be built connecting the Central Artery, the Southeast Expressway, and the Massachusetts Turnpike, also known as I-90, to that new Third Harbor Tunnel. Central Artery Project Director Peter Zook explains the first phase of the tunnel development.
The I-90 Third Harbor Tunnel will be open to commercial traffic before the end of 1994, and that early opening or first phase opening system consists of the Third Harbor Tunnel, which will be across Boston Harbor, tunnel approaches both in East Boston, where the tunnel will come up onto airport property, and in South Boston, where the tunnel will be constructed across South Boston.
Yes, that's what I wanted to see.
On April 12, 1992, 263,000 pounds of explosives were detonated at the Subaru Pier in South Boston. 75,000 cubic yards of rock were dislodged, making way for the South Boston entrance to the Third Harbor Tunnel. 5 months later, on September 16, 1992, a double-barreled steel tube that's longer than a football field and weighs 7,500 tons came in from Baltimore. It was towed into the harbor and tied up at South Boston's Reserve Channel. These tunnel tubes, now being built at Maryland's Bethlehem Steel Shipyard, will arrive one at a time each month for the next 12 months. The design is touted as a very efficient one. Boring through bedrock would cost 3 times as much and take 5 years longer. Each tube section begins as a flat piece of steel. The section is then rolled around a large steel frame, creating a sleeve. The sleeves are then put together in a protective box, creating what's called a binocular tube section. The section is 80 feet wide, 40 feet tall, and more than 300 feet long. Then they're closed at both ends, launched and towed to Boston Harbor, where for the next 3 months they'll be covered with a road surface and equipped with control systems. When finished, each tube section will be floated above a prepared trench in the harbor. A catamaran barge will then surround the tunnel section and lower it into place by weighting it with concrete. Cables stretching to the harbor bottom will guide the tube section on its descent. Lasers will also be used to ensure proper alignment. After the sections are joined with a watertight seal, the bulkheads will then be removed, and the final outfitting for highway traffic will be completed underwater. After all that's done, this is how driving to Logan Airport from South Boston might look in the new harbor tunnel. But this is just one of the many designs now being examined by planners.
This is a driver's eye view. We're traveling 40 miles an hour, which is within the design speed.
Peter Brigham and Manuel Sanchez Ruiz are computer designers for the Artery Tunnel project.
Here you're seeing different alternatives. This was a black ceiling versus a white ceiling. Coming up will be, it's a little hard to see, but we were studying whether we should have light fixtures that were butted end to end or whether we should have them spaced out a little bit.
In this model, designers experimented with colors. When red bands across the archway were tried, a flickering effect was created. Rather than risk adding more tension for Boston drivers, the design was scrapped.
It's fairly easy to change things like spacing or the specific type of component or the colors of things, and you can see what they would look like to the driver.
While designers move around colors and patterns, construction engineers keep moving around the dirt, making way for both the East Boston and South Boston ends of the harbor tunnel. And between those ends, blasting and dredging continue to carve out more trench to keep the tunnel on schedule. By the way, if you were paying attention, you heard Peter Zook say earlier that by the end of 1994, the Third Harbor Tunnel would be ready for commercial traffic. That's right, commercial traffic. They're even giving trucks and vans their own way over to the tunnel. In South Boston, problems of heavy commercial traffic have always plagued the neighborhood streets. Now the South Boston Bypass, or the Hall Road, is being built to take this traffic away, and will also be used for the transportation of construction material directly related to the dig. A Conrail line is also being updated in the same corridor. The Hall Road goes from the Southeast Expressway through the railroad yards of South Boston and connects to the route leading to the Third Harbor Tunnel. Martin Nee is the project's South Boston Community Liaison.
This is a good example of the problem that the South Boston Hall Road is being built to alleviate. We're on a residential street corner, as you can see. The truck route is on the residential fringe, and as you can see, it's not only dangerous, but it's very, very devastating to the quality of life of South Boston residents. The Hall Road itself will take about 4,700 trucks a day off of neighborhood streets, put them on an express route, get them down to the businesses that they want to service, and get them out of South Boston.
What about the rest of us who don't drive commercial vehicles? What are we supposed to do? Go out and rent 18-wheelers? Or just wait until 1998 when cars are scheduled to use the new tunnel? By the way, when it is your turn, do you have any idea how you'll get to this tunnel?
Zook explains.
In terms of the I-90 portion of the project, the existing Massachusetts Turnpike will cross the central artery and will go under more than 12 existing railroad tracks at South Station, under the Fort Point Channel in a concrete immersed tube through South Boston and connect to the new Third Harbor Tunnel across Boston Harbor. When the tunnel crosses the harbor, it goes underground onto airport property at Logan Airport, where it will come up from below ground to the surface roadway system. And finally, a new connection from Route 1A to I-90 will be built in East Boston, which will greatly improve the access of people from the North Shore to Interstate 90.
Well, this is certainly a big deal in more ways than one. Supposedly, along with all these plans comes some 15,000 jobs. A nice shot in the arm for a weak economy.
This will probably mean about 10 years worth of work for us, which we're pretty happy about. We've been losing a lot of work over the years, so that this is a big boost.
It means a lot of work for us. Keep us to work and busy for the next 3 or 4 years, which is very, very good as far as I'm concerned.
Good news to all of us. They'd have bills to pay.
Jobs have been created even while plans remain on hold. First of all, before any real artery construction can begin, all the utilities along the pathway have to be relocated. Utilities like gas, thermal, electric, water, telephone, and sewer lines will be rerouted through new utility corridors running adjacent to the new underground artery space. In a recent survey of consumer concerns, loss of telephone service rated the highest, particularly in the downtown business area, where thousands of daily transmissions, from money transfers to faxes, occur over phone lines. The green light to move these lines also provides the opportunity to replace some 70-year-old cables and upgrade the whole network with fiber optics. 225,000 circuits are being rerouted in a loop away from the artery construction to switching offices outside the city. Meanwhile, Boston Gas is moving its 36-inch pipelines away from the central artery and into the financial district. And Boston Edison is also rerouting its wires. We're talking here about jobs without desks, tough jobs.
When the moon hits your eyes like a big pizza pie, some more aim. You see what I mean by being careful here?
Sometimes a song helps you make your way in a world without windows. Working for Boston Edison can be like traveling through the darker side of Alice's Looking Glass. Arthur Carey and John Pasiti spend their days in the bowels of Boston in a clammy wonderland of meandering electrical cables and scuttling life forms.
Hello, Jeffrey. Yeah, I'm just checking. We were about a quarter away. Okay, just checking.
The pump's pumping.
Look out and see if the pump is going good there. Turtles, rats, fish.
You do have fish clog up the pump.
We have that once in a while. Oh, yeah. Well, remember the crabs we had floating down at the, you find that on the north end, down along the Atlantic Avenue.
Atlantic Avenue, Northern Avenue.
Oh, yeah, you see crabs in the manhole and that. Oh, yeah.
This here, though, the tunnels are in very good shape.
Yeah.
Very good shape.
There
you don't see
are
nothing like
rats.
that.
But when you come down, you make noise, the pump goes, or you're walking, they scatter. But I've seen them. There's definitely rats down here.
Not too often.
No.
Not too often. You can see that also, too, that white, I believe that's the salt water.
That leaks. Oh, yeah.
Leaking through.
Sure.
Even the
Now,
crystals.
this water here, if you hit it at a certain time, it actually flows. You can't walk because the water's deep, and the pump works more naturally. But it flows through here.
Now we're coming to the cable here, where it started up from the top of the tunnel and came all the way through these duct lines, and this is where they joint them in here, which is probably 400 feet from the top. And if a section of cable faults, they'll cut it here, and we'll pull this section of cable out from up top where we just came down. Now what we have to do after that is get a winch rope down here, and we feed the cable from the other side of the tunnel. Down this way here, and into the duct, and up the other side, and they have their section of cable in. And then they rejoint here, and everything should be fine. There are a lot of times when we're cable pulling, we're out, if there's a faulted primary section or a section of cable, the cable crew goes out there, and we have to wait because they have to do switching, and the troubleman has to do some switching, or the inspector, and make sure everything is safe before we get down the hole and start pulling cable.
Dennis, can we check the load on 385, 511 here to see if we can take that out?
We have to get a clearance from, we call the distribution dispatcher, to know that that line is out completely at the station or wherever the feed is from. So we can go down, put a chain on it, and pull the cable out and pull a new section in, and then have the splices. I take my tag off, which is safety-wise, and then the splices will come down and they'll put their tag on when I take my tag off. So there's always a safety procedure we follow, so nobody will get hurt. I've been here twice.
At first, you want to know the truth. At first, I think everybody, they get nervous. When you're working around these big lines, you know, and you're in the manhole, you do get nervous.
At the beginning.
At the beginning. But then it's like everything else.
It's everything else, just
it comes to you
every day you just do what you have to do and you get down the holes. And it's a major project, but we have the people that can do it without any problem. We have all experienced people downstairs, the cable crews, and we got very good cable leaders, and they're professional, and they're going to do the work professionally, and the Edison will be happy, and the local 369 will be happy because we're still working.
Get better go away, Tony.
See that? I'm telling you.
Tell them we're walking.
I'm walking. Yes, indeed.
Not all the work today is going on underground. Some of it is kicking up dust on the surface of South Boston. Resident engineer Carol Hebb explains the procedures along the Hall Road.
What we're doing is converting an old rail line that had 2 tracks in it to a shared corridor between a Conrail single track and a 2-lane truck access route that will be restricted to commercial vehicles. To your right, you can see some piles of debris. What they're doing is chipping unsound concrete off the wall, basically concrete that has been weathered to the point where it's not doing any good anymore. They chip that all off, they put a wire mesh into the wall, and then they spray new concrete onto it. What you can see to the left of the picture is what the walls will look like when they're finished. The walls that you see to the left with the nice landscaping and wood chips, in fact, look the same as the walls you can see to the right before we started. What you can see here is a perfect example of the condition that the existing rails were in. They were in pretty serious disrepair. Conrail was in the position of having to do some repairs anyway. So what we're doing together here serves pretty well for the project. We both end up with brand new facilities to move freight in and out of Boston. I wanted to explain a little bit about how modern railroads are constructed compared to the old way. It's really quite different. The rail that you see here that looks new is really only half constructed. Conrail brings these pieces of track in, these actual rails, in quarter-mile long sections. It seems very hard to believe, but they have special trains that they've constructed that have racks on them that are sort of like ski racks, where they can put one of each of these rails in its own little slot, and they stack them 6 or 10 rails wide and 4 or 5 rails high, and they can actually move rails that have been shop welded to be a quarter of a mile long. What that allows them to do is construct a much better rail. The old way of building rail you can see in the track that exists on the other side that will in fact be replaced. You can see a tie plate with some bolts through it, and at the top of the rail you can see the break between what was one piece of rail and the other piece of rail. They used to be brought in very short sections and bolted together. And it's those bolted connections that made the clackety-clackety-clack on an old railroad, because the 2 rails would settle differently. You don't get the clackety-clack on the new rail because they're all welded in the same place. The other thing about the new track construction is that if you look down the rail, you can see that it's kind of wavy right now because the pieces are so long they get quite flexible. What will happen when this is finished is that the ties that you see will be completely covered with ballast, which is these gray stones you can see. And then they have a computerized railroad train that actually rides on the rails, measures where the rail is. They back up and punch in the new alignment on a computer, and the train will actually set the rail down as they drive along, pick up the ties, shake the ballast in under where it's supposed to be, and set them back down so that the rail will be exactly where it belongs. It's all computerized now.
Trains, trenches, traffic flow. Not every job associated with the Big Dig involves construction, however. Some deal with animals and the chore of keeping them away from the dangers of blasting sites, as well as from the comforts of basements. Curtis Meininger, staff scientist of the project, explains.
The Central Artery Project has had a staff of scientists and consultants working on this project since its inception. Some of the concerns include the effects of construction of this Third Harbor Tunnel on migrating fish that need to move fresh water to spawn, and the migration of lobsters into the inner harbor for molting and spawning as well.
There was a concern that the blasting would interfere with the migration of the lobsters into the harbor. And there was also a concern that the blasting could have an effect on the catch of the lobsters. So we undertook the work. What we got here is 2,500 feet of rope out with 25 pots on it, scattered about 100 feet apart. And then as each pot comes up, they take the contents out, and those guys count them over there, measure the length of the carapace, that's the back of the animal, and determine their sex, see if there's any damage on them, and make notes if they're soft or newly molted.
$80.5. Female. $43. Cull. New shell.
This is a male, and the reason you can tell is the first pair of swimmerettes is stiff. The two parts of it have fused as they evolve, and what the male does is it ejects sperm packs into the female. This is a female, and you can see the swimmerettes are as they normally would be. They're used for swimming, and that's how you tell the difference between the two sexes on them. That's the one.
Female, too.
Okay, just a while ago, they brought up a trap that had this empty shell in it. And what had happened was the lobster, this particular lobster, had crawled out of this shell. And you can see how weak it is, because it just doesn't have a skeleton that its muscles can attach to yet, or that can give it, you know, rigid movement of the muscles. This one is very, very pliable, as you can see. Eventually, in a couple days, it'll harden right up, and this lobster will be off and running with the rest of them. Landward of the tunnel or seaward of the tunnel, there wasn't any effect from the blasting on either the catch or the migration. In fact, we've been getting more lobsters near Logan Airport and South Boston than at other locations. And in addition to that, we didn't see any damage on the lobsters around the construction site, and the amount of legal lobsters is increasing, and hopefully the lobstermen will have a good year.
Another thing that's interesting and new is that for construction of the Third Harbor Tunnel during the blasting, we have used some state-of-the-art hydroacoustic equipment to determine whether or not fish are in the blast area.
If they are in the blast area, fish react to the high-frequency sound system by swimming in the other, safer direction.
Typically in Boston Harbor, blasting is prohibited during the migration period, but because of the amount of blasting that was necessary in order to build the trench for the tunnel tube, it was beneficial to the project in terms of schedule and cost to actually use some of the state-of-the-art equipment to both determine whether or not fish are in the blast area, and then to use a high-frequency sound, an underwater speaker system, to scare the fish from the area. There are other concerns. Pest control, for one, that has been a concern in Boston throughout the beginning of the design and construction of the project. There's a comprehensive program that's being run by Dr. Bruce Colvin that includes surveying all the construction sites and implementing pest control programs to take care of that problem before construction even begins.
That program involves door-to-door education, resolving sanitation problems, and poison baiting. The basic strategy is that construction can't begin until our biologists test the area to make sure it's rodent-free. So the idea of rats running from construction, jumping in taxi cabs, is a myth. Good sanitation is really important in the neighborhoods for rodent control to work. Trash disposal, very important. And proper cleanup afterwards, making sure there's no garbage or trash out on the sidewalks. And the cans are put back as soon as possible where they can be effectively stored. It's important not to grow rats and mice by giving them food. It's very basic.
With community education and poison baiting, there have been no complaints after 3 years of construction at Cana, the Hall Road, and East and South Boston.
While some scientists figure out ways to deal with today's garbage, other scientists are taking advantage of this dig to search for and save the rubbish and relics of yesterday.
In 1988 and 89, we excavated some sites downtown, some test excavations to see what has remained in terms of archaeological sites. And we found 3 sites in the north end. 2 are house lot sites and 1 is a wharf site. The house lot sites are 17th and 18th century yards of houses that had been built fairly large, that were where people did all their gardening, kept their animals, had their crafts, and lived their day-to-day lives. So when we study these sites, we're trying to reconstruct how people lived. And the artifacts that we have help us build that story. For instance, this is a plate, a fairly nice china plate from the late 18th, early 19th century. It was made in England. This is a piece of English stoneware, and we can date this pretty specifically because it has a stamp on it that says AR, which stands for Anna Regis, who was the Queen of England between 1702 and 1714. This is a clay tobacco pipe. In the colonial period, people didn't smoke cigarettes, they smoked tobacco out of pipes. This was probably made in the colonial period, 17th or 18th century. This is a gin bottle. People would go to a bar, fill it with gin, bring it back, drink the gin, and then go back and refill it. So there was a lot of recycling in those days. One of the other aspects of the archaeology that we do is studying what we call foodways. We are interested in learning the diets of people in the colonial period. And we do that by studying the animal bones that we find on the sites. This, for instance, is a pig jaw. There are a lot of pigs kept in Boston, and there are constant references in the records to the fact that people aren't allowed to let their pigs run wild. And we surmise that the fact that they kept saying that meant that nobody paid any attention to them. In the early recipes that you find from the colonial period, it's not surprising. We really find more pig's head pieces than anything else. We also found a prehistoric site out on one of the harbor islands. The harbor islands have a lot of prehistoric sites on them. We're here at Spectacle Island at an archaeological site that was inhabited about 1,000 years ago by Native Americans. Like many of the other Boston Harbor islands, Spectacle Island was visited in the summer by Native Americans to harvest shellfish and fish and spend the warmer summer months away from the interior. And through a testing program, we found this site. It's a shell midden, which is basically a prehistoric dump, where Native Americans came out here, harvested mussels and quahogs and oysters, ate them, and then took their trash to one end of the site and threw away their broken tools in there at the same time. An example is this point, which we believe could be 3,000 years old. It was used as a tool. In other words, it was a projectile point that was lashed to a stick so that it could be used to spear animals.
There is a certain urgency to the archaeological research on Spectacle Island. In keeping with the site's historic tradition as landfill and garbage dump, the Central Artery Project intends to unload there much of the dirt from the construction. Although the end result will be 100 acres of new parkland and recreational facilities, all traces of the island's past will be obliterated.
And so this is the last chance we have to make a record. The analogy that I use is that it would be like getting an historical document at an historical society, reading it once, taking notes, and burning it. That's basically what you're doing when you're digging an archaeological site. So the recovery of information is vitally important, and that is why archaeological work is known as being so meticulous and time-consuming and slow and painful. All of the records and the artifacts will be put together in a final collection. The artifacts themselves belong to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and so they're responsible for curating them through time.
There's a common thread running through all this work, all this digging and diverting, all this discovering and dismantling, whether you're unearthing old streets or old dishes, whether you're relocating buildings or fishes, you're doing it around somebody's backyard.
The public, both the residential side as well as the business side, are really worried about disruption. So our job is to build it quickly, to build it efficiently and to ensure that the city remains open for business as well as residential purposes.
We have aggressive programs both to assist businesses in remaining open during artery tunnel construction, as well as to work with communities about the impacts of construction and to make them partners in the process of helping us make decisions that are going to make it a better project in that regard.
As government officials, Taylor and Zook are not alone in their expressed sensitivity to the public's fear of disruption, a word no one on this project feels comfortable mentioning, with good reason. When the elevated central artery was under construction 40 years ago, several planners and designers were considered callous as one commercial building after another was knocked down for the sake of progress. This did not make for good politics. So this time around, to avoid ruffled feathers and lawsuits, there's an attempt to placate just about everyone. This is called building a consensus.
In building the grand coalition which now supports the project, ways have been found to eliminate the harm, or very largely to mitigate the harm that any groups might possibly suffer from the project. This is not simply a classic project in which somebody is saying there will be beneficiaries and therefore we'll just take the sacrifice that others have to make for the greater good of the greater number. This has been a project in which from a fairly early stage people have taken it for granted that virtually everybody had to be prevented from experiencing any harm.
Mitigate the harm. That's what he said. The process of mitigation is a political euphemism for modifying designs for the sake of harmony, or lessening impact on a community, or buying someone's cooperation. In short, it's official quid pro quo. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. Here's an example of mitigation from project director Zook.
The reason that the Third Harbor Tunnel is the first element of the project which will be open to traffic is that it is an element of the project and a mitigation measure for the project. Taking commercial traffic off of the existing artery and getting East Boston traffic over to East Boston in a more efficient manner is an important mitigation commitment for the project.
That's mitigation in a very positive light, but in some quarters that kind of light seems to be flickering.
I use the word mitigate. It's impact. It's the same as mitigating the impact between getting killed with a .22 and getting killed with a howitzer.
Joe Matara is a North End candy shop owner and president of the Haymarket Pushcart Vendors Association. Along with fellow merchants, he is skeptical about the minimal level of disruption claimed by project officials.
The traffic pattern is going to be altered, and it's going to give people who want to come into the area an indecision as to where to park. That's going to be the first inclination of some detrimental effects in regards to the big dig.
I think it'll hurt us. I think it's going to hurt us, where all the street is going to be disturbed and people are going to find it hard to park and people won't be able to get into shopping.
It's going to slow everything down. I mean, you got a lot of traffic that usually comes through it, isn't going to come down here. A lot of people feel that, you know, there's nowhere to park, there's nowhere to go, and it stops them from coming in.
We have a limited amount of space for parking down here. And once you start bringing in and thinking of all the logistics that brings in the trucks and the workers and removing, take a look where the artery is now, is approximately 2,500 to 2,700 parking spaces. And if they're going to start working right underneath where the artery is, they have to remove all those people and those cars. Most of our business is transit. It comes down by car. The people who do the shopping, for the food shopping at the end of the week, Saturdays in particular, if there's no place to park down here, they're certainly not going to carry bags. There isn't anything that they can't buy someplace else, and they can get free parking someplace else, and they can drive in and not worry about where they're going to park their car, or if they can get their car in here, to park it anywhere.
And, you know, you don't know if you're going to get these people back again. You know, and it's happened before, and we're a little worried that it'll happen again.
The fears of Haymarket's vendors go back to the original artery's construction. 50 years ago, Haymarket consisted of pushcarts surrounded by retail businesses along Blackstone Street, seen here looking up toward North Station. The buildings on the right were torn down to make way for the new artery's exit ramp, thereby cutting Haymarket's commercial space nearly in half. Now there's a plan on the drawing board for a new building outlets to replace the ramp. This will mitigate the neighborhood back to the way it was. But some, like former City Councilor Fred Langone, are still doubtful about the traffic.
You're only adding one more lane of traffic at this point. It's 6 now, it'll be 8, all the way down to State Street. And this is where the gridlock is, right here. So you add one lane, it's costing you $7 billion. It's always going to be, and you're putting it underground. When you put something underground, it slows down. It doesn't go faster.
And then they're going to tell you after it's all over in 15 or 20 years, it's going to be wonderful. That's the Rip Van Winkle theory. Go to sleep for 15 or 20 years and wake up and you got another 15. There's a lot of us that won't be around in 15 or 20 years. And I heard the same story when they were doing this, what they called the steel necklace, the existing arterial highway. They told us that was going to be the panacea for all the traffic. And immediately when that was put into and opened, it was out of style then.
At least the artery was built before it went out of style. Scheme Z never got out of the model stage. This plan, supported by Governor Dukakis' Secretary of Transportation, Fred Salvucci, was proposed as the grand design for the Charles River crossing. 18 lanes and 70 acres of routes, ramps, and bridges. Scheme Z was supposed to connect the future underground artery with Starro Drive and the Tobin Bridge. What it didn't connect with was a string of critics that stretched from Charlestown to Cambridge to the state legislature. There were too many conflicting interests to mitigate. After a collection of lawsuits from environmentalists and a change of governors, Scheme Z was DOA. Here's a sampling of the fallout in the closing days of the Dukakis administration.
It's basically taken the problem of the elevated central artery downtown and shifted it over to the citizens of Charlestown and Cambridge.
The Miller's River, which is just behind us, is a resource protected by the State Wetlands Protection Act. It will be filled with 13 concrete piers to support the highway, which will be directly above it, causing severe shading impacts as well as filling. I consider a lot of the mitigation proposals that they have come up with to be compensation. It will improve other areas of the lower basin if the promise is kept, but it will in no way lessen the impact of this very massive highway crossing.
The argument that some of the opponents have made is that it's like taking a standard clover leaf and putting all 4 leaves in one quadrant. And our response to that is exactly. We've taken all 4 leaves of a standard clover leaf, put them in the quadrant that is already industrial, already has a very noisy but necessary activity called Boston Sand and Gravel and the railroad. And there is a price to it. It further reinforces the industrial character around Boston Sand and Gravel. I think that's an appropriate balancing of the values. It can't be beautiful residential everywhere, and it shouldn't be. You know, the city won't function.
There are other alternatives that could combine a tunnel element, that could use some viaduct, some elevated structure that would certainly be acceptable to the Charlestown community. Basically, the state will tell you that they've examined 31 plans and that this is the best they can do. If this is the best they can do, I think it's not a reason to build it. I think it's a reason for the taxpayers to ask for their money back.
I know that Richard Taylor, the Secretary-Designate of Transportation and Construction, has said that he wants to make sure everyone's concerns about Scheme Z are heard, and he plans to get out there in the community in Charlestown, Cambridge, other areas, and make sure that everyone has an opportunity to submit their input.
Soon after Well took office, Scheme Z was history, and the search was on for a new design. If anything, the flack over Scheme Z and its bumpy ramps of mitigation demonstrate the fragility of urban planning. We should learn by now. We've been down this path before. When they put up that Sky Road in the 50s, they also planned on a few other changes.
This is a 1948 master plan, which is authorized by the legislature in 46, and which is the genesis of the Central Artery as far as proposing the Central Artery and a number of radial expressways for a highway transportation system for metropolitan Boston. Actually, the reason some of the problems with traffic were made after the Central Artery was finished. When other elements of the overall plan were scrubbed and not built, this was the recommendation of the 1948 master plan, which was to be an inner ring of Central Artery and the inner belt, an outer ring, Route 128, and 7 radial expressways. Of course, the inner belt was not built. The portion that was not built was through Somerville and Cambridge and Brookline and Roxbury. Southwest Expressway was not built, So I-95, Interstate 95, comes up from the south from Providence and goes around 128 all the way to Route 1 on the north side of Boston. Boston is one of the few cities on the East Coast where 95 does not go through the center urban area.
All right, so we should be used to best-laid plans slipping into oblivion. But we can dream, can't we? After all, we'll only have a continuing nightmare if we don't have high hopes that we can have something better than what we have now.
What we have on the existing artery is a structure which carries 8 to 9 hours a day of traffic jam. And if we do nothing with the existing artery, by the year 2010, we will have 14 to 15 hours a day of solid traffic jam in the center of Boston. And that's clearly unacceptable, so there is a need to replace the existing structure. In addition, this structure is an aging structure, and if we decided not to depress the central artery, we'd still be faced with the problem of repairing in place the existing artery and bringing it up to current federal highway standards.
I think it's the best idea anybody's ever thought of.
I'd like this when it's done. It'll be great.
I think it's the biggest mistake Boston could ever make. And it's just going to be the same old traffic jam after they're done in 10 years.
Well, there you have it. In an unscientific sampling, 2 out of 3 Boston drivers are still behind the plan that's supposed to get us out of this mess. That's encouraging. And we need encouragement when you consider that at any given moment, 3 out of 3 Boston drivers are still behind 3 other Boston drivers. Ugh. Happy motoring.
I've been trying to get to you for a long time, because constantly you've been on my mind. I was thinking about a shortcut I could take, but it seems like I made a mistake. But I was wrong. Ooh, took too long. I got caught in the rush hour. The fella started to shower you with love and affection. Now you won't look in my direction. On the expressway to your heart. That expressway, not the best way.